The message stick is an important symbol of traditional Aboriginal practice to connect with each other in times of great ceremony, to bring peoples together to celebrate the sacred stories of life. These stories are passed down generation after generation, from the time when the Great Spirit Bayami stepped down from the Mirrabooka, the Milky Way, onto Mount Yango, as the sacred laws were given. The messages that were told were, we always celebrate our ancestors of earth and creation, remembering those journeys through time, which gives us the life we now enjoy to this day. The protection and the preservation of our environments, the kinship and the relationships of our families and peoples, acknowledgements and respect, which in turn creates a balance between all living things. The message stick is sent out through our communities for the gatherings, to come together to strengthen those connections and those spiritual values in life. In the Dreamtime, the Great Spirit Bayami stepped down from the Mirrabooka, the Milky Way, on the sacred mountain of Mount Yango, crushing its peak. The laws and traditions and customs were all handed to the people. After awakening the spirits that created all the mountains, the rivers, the billabongs, the waterholes and the oceans, he stepped back up at Mount Werrong, back into the Mirrabooka, the river of life, and the journey of life itself had begun. This is probably the most ancient site out of all the lands.
And you're talking 20,000 years old?
Yeah, or more.
Or more.
Yeah. Mount Yango is a very significant place for Aboriginal people. The Five Lands Committee was invited by Aboriginal consultants to Yango to experience the mountain and the story of Bayami firsthand.
We had the pleasure of hearing the stories about its sacredness to the Aboriginal people, the creation stories and the serpent and Bayami and all of those things, and the Mimi spirits that are so sacred to them.
I think to hear the stories, to see the carvings, to see and hear the way that their ancestors lived, and the lessons that I could learn out of that, and the lessons that my thought process could do to gain that spirituality that they have. I think that's one of the greatest things that we can get from the Aboriginal community, is that spirituality.
Very strong songline that actually connects with the women's dreaming and women's stories.
We went out there, a group of us who were associated with the Five Lands Walk, to get some inspiration and also bring back a message for this year.
Well, the message stick was an innovation this year where we wanted to connect more of the spirituality of the Aboriginal people to the communities of the Central Coast, and to try and use the message stick as a conduit to bring people together.
It's old practice of ceremony where the message stick in traditional times, Aboriginal people would take or carve and paint a message stick, and this message stick would be passed on to community to inform them of a ceremony that is to take place.
Well, the Five Lands Walk is a community-based event.
And it's a free event.
Everybody can come along and leave their wallets behind.
It goes from
McMaster's Beach, Copacabana, Avoca, North Avoca and Terrigal.
It's a journey, a 9-kilometre walk.
Anyone can do the walk. It's a soft adventure type experience.
Connecting people to people.
People to place.
To connect the people from those villages.
And we live with our environment.
The walk itself goes through some of the most pristine areas of the Central Coast.
It was a way of showing off our land.
With each land celebrating its own unique identity.
Because each of the 5 communities is different.
To our opportunity of working with all the different cultures and communities.
So they start at McMaster's Beach, they're welcomed there, and they go on a journey,
spiritual journey,
through the Five Lands.
For some it's a spiritual connection.
There's a large emphasis on our Indigenous culture.
The ancient culture of the Central Coast.
Connecting with the land, which has been, a cultural way of life.
It's also celebrating the migration of the humpback whale.
People know that when the Five Lands Walk's on,
You're usually going to see whales coming through as well.
And with that is a significant part of the Aboriginal community's totems.
It's art.
To celebrate the diversity of our community, the different multicultural groups.
Which they brought their colour, their culture, dance, music and food.
At the end of the day, they'll have connected better with the people in this community, and they'll have connected better with the land that we live on.
We consider this all started as a few interested people who met down at Cochrane Lagoon.
To understand us, walk with us. To understand us, we all need to pull down these walls and learn to walk again in peace.
And those people who were there back then speak of this wonderful connection they had. And then a few people heard about how nice it was. I think the old Aboriginal elders were down there, and it was just something that was really, really rare.
Yes, forward we've struggled.
People wanted to get involved in community art. They wanted to learn more about their Indigenous connection. People loved the environment of the Central Coast, and it is so beautiful. People loved their small villages, but there was also a theme that they wanted to connect to one another. Plus, I was keen to promote physical activity and walking. This coincided with me having come back from a trip overseas where I'd been walking in the Cinque Terre in Italy.
As we had been given the idea from Helen Polkinghorne, who then went on leave for a year. So we were charged with the responsibility of making the Five Lands Walk happen, and it's been a fantastic journey for us, hasn't it? Yeah,
A deep one.
A deep one.
And at that time, Con Ryan and I were plotting and scheming to have some kind of arts festival in Avoca, because there are so many artists living in Avoca. And my passion's always been combining sport and art and marrying the two and saying, what is it that connects those things instead of separates them.
And for me, now I can say it was the confluence, the coming together of real champions, of really amazing people who came together and made it happen.
It was Ilio Gaddy created a community team to drive this event. So it was always his vision that the community would carry this event through, which is exactly what's happened, like over the years.
The dance 2,500 would have agreed to for miscellaneous expenses so that we could have a working fund. That should go in next week.
I think, like a lot of councils, they have a lot of things that they want to support, and with community events like this, they like to see them go on their own way, and they nurture them through their childhood and let them go in their adolescence, which is where we're at the moment. I think the Five Lands Walk is a healthy adolescent moving off into its own future.
Government's going to give you rules, regulations, guidelines, red tape. We want this to be owned by the people, because then you'll get even a better result, and it won't be constricted.
I think it's the best it's been, and I think that there's more people involved in it, and they're more emotionally involved, and I think the end result is assured because of it.
I think the message itself should be slightly poetic and not too explicit.
And talk about, better connections in society, in communities and in families.
So the Five Lands Committee was introduced to Mount Yango and its energy.
What people will take out of whatever we say, right?
Yeah.
It'll be many and varied.
The message that was delivered to all of the lands was created on that trip.
Took it on faith that the mountain would reveal to us what the message would be. So a group of us sat around a table with our pens and papers out. Within about 30 seconds had the message.
And that message was given and taken from Mount Yango. It was created from the mountain itself.
And it was really beautiful. It just sort of came out as we as we discovered the mountain and looked across that beautiful bush and this beautiful mountain.
The energy of that mountain is very sacred, and for a message to come down from the mountain to the people is, in a spiritual sense, filled with the God energy of that mountain, and it brings a blessing to the people of the Five Lands Walk and anybody who participates in it or who is associated with it.
For me, the Five Lands Walk is bringing us together. I've been involved in trying to bring our communities together, to work together, to strive together. It is now time that we walk together and work harder together to bring us much, much closer.
That we symbolically painted a message stick, and we had traditional symbols on the stick which represented that message.
I'm a Kamilaroi man from the northwest. I'm here today to acknowledge the Darkinjung people whose land we're now having this ceremony on. I'd like to acknowledge our elders, past and present, and I'd like to acknowledge everybody who is here today and welcome you to Darkinjung country.
The message stick was handed quite symbolically from representatives of the Aboriginal community. Jesse Bly, who would be the custodian of that message stick for the next 12 months. And it's quite important that we chose a 14-year-old youth because it symbolises the link to the young people who are coming through. The mayor, who represents the people, handed that message stick to Jesse.
Message stick was another way of sending the message out to people. So it was very symbolic, it was very moving to actually have that message stick, to be able to say, well, here in traditional methods, we send the message on, we pass on what we are doing and who we are and where we're from.
It's culturally significant for Aboriginal people to be involved because
these are the traditional lands of the Darkinjung people.
The Aboriginal community has a lot to share with us.
It's an opportunity of learning more about their customs.
The traditional custodians of the land.
It's about acknowledging the whole history of the land we live in.
About the community that lived here for generations, like the Darkinjung people.
To show that Aboriginal people are still strong and alive in Darkinjung.
And to understand their culture, which has survived through all the millennia.
And how that plays a role in our ecology for the future and
adds a significant level of sort of spirituality.
The last couple of years have been a very important time in our culture, in our society, with the reconciliation process.
We need to understand where and how it all started.
This is the next step.
It's also important for Aboriginal people to come out and get involved in community and know that there is other Aboriginal people around in the area.
And to get to know them.
So it's sort of the constant, the overarching theme that binds it all together, physically and spiritually.
It really revives the Aboriginal cultural way and belief of the Darkinjung nation or area.
To give a vehicle, I guess, for our community, our youth, our Aboriginal people to showcase their culture and heritage in today, whether it's traditional or contemporary.
I think it's essential.
I think is a privilege.
At the beginning, when I went and took literally care did a feasibility study, if you want, or an analysis of the Five Lands, I realized that geographically the lands were completely divided. There were hills dividing them, and even the same beach had a lagoon dividing the two coastal villages.
And the communities were so different and are so different, and those differences are to be celebrated, but it's also really challenging from an organiser's point of view.
McMaster's is a really different energy to Avoca. And Copacabana is really different to Terrigal, and North Avoca is different to Avoca.
The sum total of it all was everywhere I looked, I saw divisions, fragmentations, distances, boundaries, and it was difficult to see how all of this could have come together and formed a unity. There were differences to celebrate. That's the only thing we could do. At that particular stage, the Aboriginal leaders, Kevin Duncan and Phil Bligh, said to see everything connected to the land. That was a jolt to the system, because suddenly the land was this mother, was this one figure that united everything. And they would use in their language words like McMaster is joined to Copacabana by the lagoon. The hill joins Copacabana to Avoca. And then pointed out that it was not just the land unifying them, but also the sea, and they would point at the sea and say that sea is the place where the wild migration happens. And whales are a symbol of unity and family and clan.
They represent kinship and connection, but also in a lot of the stories how whales are the keepers of time. You know, that they have a very special place here on our planet.
For the Aboriginal community, it's the totem of the dark and young people. It's also totems of other Aboriginal people around Australia. Traditionally, Aboriginal people would have ceremonied and done song and dance to make sure the whales' migration was safe. Each community then passed on a song that travelled around Australia to make sure they travelled safely and got back to have their babies and back home.
Sky art's a 3,000-year-old art form, and I've always been fascinated about why do art that only makes sense from the sky, because here we are on the ground. But we really need to awaken what I call our sky sight, learning to use our imaginations to get above our problems and see the big picture, see how everything is connected. That, in that realm of our sky sight, is where the solutions live to the problems that haunt us as a species. And so awakening our sky sight also means learning to see through the eyes of all beings.
We first started right here at the Haven. I actually created a whale on the ground, and we filled it with people, not materials. But it was great because we had a lot of the Aboriginal community and kids that were part of that day, and elders who were part of the eye with non-Aboriginal elders, and that's how it all began. The next year we had an artist from America, Daniel Dancer, and he created a whale, so we worked together in creating that whale.
So I think the art and the Landswalk are a perfect marriage. The fact that people can't really tell what it is on the ground, they have to use their imaginations to get above it. It's such a metaphor for the interconnection of us all that we can only feel and we often ignore.
A couple of years ago, I worked with Di Wu, the Chinese Tibetan artist.
The mandala pattern represents the circle is like a universe, and the square represents the earth. So like 4 directions. I feel the Aboriginal idea and the Buddhist idea is exactly the same. For example, the Aboriginal people thinking the earth is the mother, and they respect all the natural things like a tree, like animals.
This year we've got a local artist from the Central Coast, Kathy.
Basically I've started from Masuriyamoto's image of a water crystal. From the central point of the crystal there are 6 points that are radiating out. From these points there are 5 yellow circles, and the 5 yellow circles are the 5 communities of the 5 lands, and within that is white, which is basically communicating the spirits of all these people, that inner core that is the most beautiful light part of these people connecting in this dance of joy, of connection, and this cultural day that we're celebrating.
Mimis are the spirit of the people, and the centre part represents community coming together for celebration, with the ocean symbol representing where we are on the Central Coast. The Mimis, they represent that spirit of the people. The Mimis are free, and in Aboriginal culture, Mimis are everywhere. Everything has a Mimi, a tree, a rock, a plant, an animal, including us. I put in the Mimis to represent our connection to the earth, of the land, but also a representation of us, how our true spirit inside as people.
Rembrandt uses a brush, I use a bucket.
This mandala actually is a mandala with traditional meaning in Aboriginal symbolism, represents community coming together and celebrating with ceremony. In the middle of the design represents the ocean and the place where we all live. Circles represent strength. It represents people sitting face to face with each other. The way that Aboriginal people have sat in circles, around campfires, a traditional symbol and a universal symbol, I suppose, in a lot of different countries too that use the circle as that symbol.
The star is a malleable form of the 6 points of the crystal. It's malleable because the centre core is blue, which is creativity, and it's what we can create by having a beautiful relationship of love and gratitude.
And
did you see it coming around at the top?
You can see it. It's a pretty good view all the way around.
Yeah,
I think we'll start getting the questions now on the call centre. What does it mean?
Yeah.
So I need an interpretation that will fully reflect the morning star and the Mimi spirits.
Well, this will give you the camera if you like it. Okay.
Ever since it started, we've always had the awakening. The awakening was introduced into the Five Lands to create ceremony, so other people can experience traditional ways. We introduced the dance of the morning star, which is a dance to greet the morning star, the first sunrise. This is why the awakening was born into the Five Lands Walk.
This year we had a number of lead-up events to the Five Lands Walk, and that was a deliberate strategy to raise public awareness of the event.
The awakening was a celebration to celebrate the lengthening of the days after the winter solstice and to offer a blessing for the Five Lands Walk and to remind us of the spirituality of the walk and the importance of connecting in a very meaningful way to the land and to its totem, the whale.
And it also is a vehicle where we could all connect because we had some of the ethnic cultures involved with it.
Ceremonies that we included this year were the kava ceremony by the Fijian community, in which they presented kava to representatives of the Five Lands Walk, the mayor, who is the patron of the Five Lands Walk.
Mother.
The Maori community put on a performance which was a blessing for the Five Lands Walk. One of the most important things this year was the introduction of food and the sharing of food at the end. Something else happens when we sit down together and share food. Ritual is one of the things that has sustained communities for thousands of years, and without ritual, communities break down. Food right throughout every culture, throughout the eons, food has been a very important part in the celebration.
Latitude 33 was one event that we had as a real focus so that people would really take notice and say, oh, what's that? What's that? What's that about?
There was a full moon and an eclipse, and I didn't plan that.
And so there was a special magic in the air. There was a smoking ceremony on the beach led by Gavi Duncan. But somehow having that smoking ceremony on the beach and the full moon and the eclipse, it all just tied in. It is all about connection. What is the connection on latitude 33? What are the connections that unite us? Not the stories that divide us.
As latitude 33 indicates, that we had indigenous cultures from South America, from Valparaiso in Chile, from Cape Town in South Africa, as well as Avoca Beach, all of those on latitude 33.
I've worked with the BBC a lot. I love working with different cultures musically. And I love working with film and vision. And I love working with theatre. I love playing grand piano. I love working with dancers. So what's a thing that I can use all those skills to really contribute something to the Five Lanes Walk? I just wanted to create a show that's really uplifting and talk about the positive aspects of humanity. So I think latitude 33 is a really positive statement, and that it fits in really well with Five Lanes Walk.
So I think it really did help to raise awareness, and it showed the spirit of the Five Lanes Walk, which is connecting people to people and people to place, connecting us around the globe, not just locally.
We all come from the earth. We are all part of the earth.
The earth is part of us. As we connect to the earth,
we connect to ourselves and each other.
Mother Earth is our past and our future. To respect our origins and enrich our future, we respect life itself.
Back in 2006, a group of like-minded people gathered to celebrate the place they lived in, while acknowledging the Aboriginal totem of the humpback whale. During every winter solstice since, the journey of connecting people to people and people to place has continued. In the second part of the series, experience the day as we pass on the message of the Five Lands Walk. Broadcasting from the 1st of June, best seats in the house are at your house, only on Opal Broadcasting Network.
Bye.